I made a statement in my Morrowind video that went something like this. The reason people forgive its main quest for fumbling the war at Red Mountain is that thematically it's concluded by the Tribunal DLC. In a sense, people are willing to forgive the iniquities of a game if its expansion content is good. The Shivering Isles is the awkward middle child to Blood Moon and Dragonborn. Both of those expansions took place on Solstheim, the middle ground between Vardenfell and Skyrim. Conversely, the Shivering Isles has little thematic relevance to its parent province at the surface level. This is the fault of Oblivion, and Shivering Isles cannot help that Sheogorath was effectively irrelevant the first time around. So much so, they changed the voice actor for the expansion. For the better, perhaps, but it kinda shows that this wasn't entirely planned. If you look at it cynically, Shivering Isles is an olive branch to the Morrowind fans. Visually, the Isles look similar to Vardenfell, at least superficially. Mania is way more colorful than the Ascadian Isles or Grazelands, and Dementia is a lot more gloomy than the Bitter Coast. There's even a point where an area is turned gray and dead, and I stopped and stared at the horizon and realized that I was standing in the Ashlands. I think the worst part of the Shivering Isles is showing the real potential that Bethesda has to make a creatively alien world, a potential that barely ever shone through in Skyrim, and we never really saw in Fallout. Maybe Starfield will get the chance to be truly alien. It did not. And I'm not talking about weirdness. If you play the Shivering Isles and just conclude, that's weird, then you didn't really try to understand it. There's a disturbing trend in Oblivion videos of excluding the Shivering Isles, almost as though people think if they include it, it may invalidate some of their arguments on Oblivion, which isn't true. The Shivering Isles does not try to fix level scaling, broken quests, bad storylines, or face gen, but it does have an interesting quest line, and it actually somewhat leverages the potato-faced freaks into thematically fitting Oblivion's tone. In a sense, the Shivering Isles is probably the best piece of content that could have been made for Oblivion. We start with the personnel change. Rolston is gone, replaced by Nesmith and Nelson. Alan Nanez, Kirk Coleman, and Brian Chapin continued as quest designers with 2 new team members, Eric J. Capone and John Paul Duvall, who were both late-game additions to Oblivion. Eric J. Capone started at Bethesda after being a mission designer at Monolith in 2005. No, he didn't contribute to Fear, he worked on The Matrix Online. He was late to Bethesda in working on Oblivion, contributing at the tail end, and he designed 2 unspecified DLC pieces, as well as working on Knights of the Nine and eventually Shivering Isles. I was not able to find as much information on John Paul Duvall. He showed up one day, got an additional design credit on Oblivion, and then became a main designer by Shivering Isles. It's funny that, despite having as many designers on the Shivering Isles, there's much less content. And obviously this is because it had a shorter dev time, with Bethesda aching to move their entire studio on to production of Fallout 3. A gate has opened in the Niben Bay, to Sheogorath's realm of Oblivion, the titular Shivering Isles. And this is...
because my lord wills it to be so. It poses no danger to Mundus. No compact has been violated.
Man, the Temple District is still on fire, and we've already retconned never again. In truth, this does not bother me. We see other princes extend invitations to their realms, even potentially after the main quest's conclusion. My only problem is that there's never really a plot point about who brought the gate here. Periite and Boethia's invitations took place at their shrines, but apparently Daedric princes can just plop unsolicited gates to their realms down in the middle of a sea traffic lane, and as long as the intent isn't set to hostile, the mods won't get involved. A man dressed as the Breville Guard is standing at the gate, warning people not to go in and killing anything hostile that comes out. Now, there are gameplay reasons for this, but Gaius here is not a guard. He won't attempt to arrest the player, and no one in Breville even acknowledges his existence. After spitting out a crazy guy who the guard kills, Sheogorath will invite us into the realm. We're greeted by the legend himself, Jeff Baker as Haskell. This guy was the Morrowind voice of the Dunmer and Imperials, if this voice sounds familiar but you couldn't place it.
I am Haskell, Chamberlain to the Lord Sheogorath.
Great. I'm sure you'll fit right in. Follow me up to the office and they'll finish your release.
It's a shame they couldn't get him for more roles. I absolutely understand not wanting to do the gravelly Dunmer voice for hours worth of voice lines, even though it's not necessary as this was a regional thing to the Dunmer who lived near Red Mountain. Haskell here lays out the premise for the expansion. Sheogorath is looking for a champion and so has taken to inviting mortals to his realm. Whether we continue or not is our choice. Personally, I would think the $30 this thing cost at launch would have been the choice moment. It's not like you future-proofed any of the other DLC in Oblivion. We get deposited into the Fringe, a quarantine zone for the realm proper. We have to either get past the Gatekeeper, a giant flesh golem which possesses the keys to the gate, or go mad and get admitted into the realm proper. Seeing as there is not a way to actually go mad in Oblivion outside of roleplaying, our only option is the former, which means that canonically, the cock did not go mad. Beating the Gatekeeper is interesting because while there are ways to make the fight easier, we could also just elect to fight him head on and could even win. Some snooping around reveals that the golem's creator visits him at midnight, and she will even say that her tears adversely affect the Gatekeeper. There's also a local, J-Red Iceveins, who wants to attempt to fight the Gatekeeper, to brute force his way into the realm. He posits that the best way to kill things is with its bones. That's a Nordic philosophy for you. After a short visit to where the Gatekeeper was built, we're fashioned with 20 Gatekeeper bone arrows. There are several different varieties of arrow to be found, all of which are leveled to the player, and the best of which does 16 damage, 1 point more than Daedric arrows. Shivering Isles is, in many ways, a horizontal progression to Oblivion rather than a vertical progression like Tribunal and Blood Moon were for Morrowind, and that's not a criticism. Now, before we continue, I have to put this out there. It's fairly evident that with most things, I'm not really an expert in the stuff I talk about, outside of like sound engineering and writing, which is tied to my profession as a video editor. The thing is, however, when I butcher music theory in a discussion of the soundtrack, it's mostly correct for the benefit of the people who don't know much about that subject, and hopefully only minorly cringy for the people who actually study it. At the end of the day, however, if I'm wrong about music, it's not really that harmful. An inevitable part of this analysis is going to be a discussion on mental illness, which is where I have the most potential to say something actually harmful if I'm wrong. I'm putting this disclaimer in, less so as a way of shielding myself because, well, people will just ignore it if they want to, and more so as a way to shield you, the listener. Humans are prone to seeing symptoms in themselves and self-diagnosing problems that don't exist, and also paradoxically ignoring symptoms and conditions that do exist. It's important to remember that we're seeing these topics through a lens, through writers who themselves have differing levels of experience with these issues. I don't like Sheogorath because they changed his characterization to be random internet humor. But here's a post by a guy who claims to be bipolar schizoaffective who says that Sheogorath helps him explain his condition to people. In this sort of situation, I personally would defer my analysis to actual scholars. Unfortunately, as far as I can see, nobody's taken the time to write up a thesis about how mental illness is portrayed in the Shivering Isles beyond the surface level. The best I found was an article written by a doctor of psychology about how she uses the Shivering Isles to introduce her students to concepts that she plans to teach. When what I need is, for example, to know what mental illness Relmina Verenum is suffering from. I would say she's suffering from psychotic disorder. She routinely tortures people, lacks any sense of empathy except for the delusional relationships she does have, a motherly relationship towards a flesh golem that is forced to love her back, and a parasocial relationship with Sheogorath who, in reality, is just using her talents to make abominations. Her apprentice, Nanette Dawn, opens the way up for us to exploit the weakness of the Gatekeeper. She appears to suffer from schizoaffective disorder. She's suffering from auditory hallucinations, which could be a whole host of things, but since the sounds are almost always contextual to the conversation she's having, and seeing as this is a common trope used for schizophrenia, I think that's the case. None of the other residents of the Fringe seem to be suffering from noticeable mental illness yet, which is the point. The Fringe is meant to ripen people into madness before their invitation to the realm proper. J-Red Iceveins is another contender, seemingly obsessed with bones, perhaps autism since he came from Skyrim. His obsession with bones and social awkwardness are my case, although our understanding of autism in 2007 was super basic, so I don't know how accurate that assessment is. When we defeat the Gatekeeper, we get 2 keys which correspond to the 2 gates. As Haskell explains, 1 gate will lead to mania, and 1 gate will lead to dementia.
As I've said, all choices have consequences, but don't trouble yourself too much with your decision.
Yeah, no kidding. The actual choice isn't which route we take to get to New Sheoth, as you could use the Mania Gate and still travel through Dementia. Rather, the choice is between 2 powers which are not communicated to the player. The Blessing of Mania is a power that casts Frenzy, while the Blessing of Dementia is a power that casts Demoralize. Fitting, one to start fights, and one to end them. There is a large mountain in the middle of the island, meaning that the player is gently pushed towards taking the roads through the middle of each region. There isn't really much of note until we arrive at the city of New Sheoth, which is divided into 2 districts, each corresponding to their own region. Here we'll encounter the strange residents of the island before heading up to the palace and meeting with Sheogorath.
Why, look who's here. You! How about that? You've made it this far, farther than anyone else. Well done!
To summarize a lot of dialogue, Sheogorath is pleased we made it, but needs to replace the gatekeeper or adventurers are going to start showing up and ruining things. While this is his realm and he could pretty much do anything he wanted to his intruders, he prefers to take a more hands-off approach. Unfortunately, I feel like this decision has colored the other princes' realms in their portrayal. Daedric princes are effectively omniscient when it comes to their realms. Mehrunes allowed the player to close Oblivion gates in order to prop up his chosen boy Martin. But if you're in Cold Harbor and Molag Bal wants you to die, then you better be a goddamn Daedric prince or have Chim if you expect to not end up becoming a greasy smear on the side of his mace. Even if Sheogorath isn't taking an active role in kicking the normals out of his realm, we can probably assume he's watching everything we do more than he would care to admit. And I mean, if we try to fight him, he'll just teleport us into the sky and send us falling to our deaths. It's a shame the bounds of Imperial law regarding levitation magic reach even into the Mad God's plane of Oblivion. So we're sent out to Xedilian to reactivate it. It's an old tool Sheogorath used before the Gatekeeper to keep the normals out. Now it's just a Grummite den. Grummites appear to be a primitive mortal race, their nature largely up for speculation. We know they are not Daedra though because they have a reproductive cycle. Anyways, the book Sheogorath gives us details the process of restoring Xedilian, and after doing so, a gate opens to reveal a teleportation pad, which takes us to Caliban Narandal.
Finally, Lord Sheogorath has sent someone to assist me.
Yeah, dude, he totally did not forget about you until he needed you. Caliban designed this dungeon, and it's used to lure adventurers here. Caliban's interesting, almost a mirror to Relmina. He was the first guy, or maybe just an earlier guy, to create a tool for keeping outsiders out and seems to be delusional about his importance to the realm. But where Relmina leaned towards dementia, Caliban leans more towards mania. Could also be schizotypal disorder, could also be that whoever wrote this character didn't do a good job of keeping with the motif of the expansion and equated mild eccentricity with madness. Xedilian uses a resonator to draw adventurers, and sure enough, a trio has arrived in time for a demonstration. This quest is fairly memorable for a lot of people, even though it's just mechanically pushing buttons and watching the events unfold without you. That speaks to the character of the writing and the premise. The first chamber has a gnarl in it. It's small and harmless, and the group shows varying degrees of caution about it. One button makes the gnarl huge and pumps LSD into the room, driving the rogue insane. The other button releases a swarm of gnarls into the room, which the group fights and the rogue will die in the process. The second chamber has a large mound of treasure inside a cage. The two will be drawn to it, whereupon a button will fire a trap, killing the mage, while the other button drops hundreds of keys, driving the mage insane as he searches desperately for the correct key. The third chamber is full of corpses, which unnerves the orc. One button causes him to hallucinate that he died, without knowing how, driving him insane, while the other animates a bunch of the corpses and he dies in the process. The only downside of this quest is that there isn't really commentary or consequence for the player based on their choices. In fact, we only have to make these choices in order to leave. Also, what happens if there's more than 3 adventurers? Are there more chambers, or...
He had another friend.
What? It's impossible. You can't have more than 2 friends. It was a fatal mistake.
Still, it's a fun quest, and the reward of Dawnfang is pretty cool. It's a unique blade, said to hail from Akavir, which changes between a dawn and dusk version every day. It also increases in power if the wielder manages to kill 12 enemies that day. During the day, the sword does fire damage, and if nourished, it will absorb health. At night, the sword does frost damage, and if nourished, will absorb magicka. My only problem really was keeping the blade constantly sated. I mean, yeah, you could use summons to do it, but it's just tedious. As we go to leave, we're greeted by some lads called the Knights of Order. They match the motif of all the gray crystals powering Xedilian, which does not bode well. Caliban tells us that we should immediately inform Sheogorath about their arrival. Sheogorath's not actually surprised and says that this happens at the end of every era, but before he dispatches us to deal with the problem, he wants us to learn about the culture of mania and dementia. I think the quests are out of order. Also, we can summon Haskell to us anywhere now. Yeah, he'll always have a bit of advice for the player, which I think is mechanically a good idea for something like the Shivering Isles, even if they never really go so crazy as to risk losing the player. So, starting with Mania. The Duke of Mania, Théodon, appears to have had a relationship with someone from Dementia that resulted in him losing the Chalice of Reversal, which has complicated his ability to do Feldu. He wants it back, but doesn't give us a whole lot of information. His nearby servant, Wide-Eye, will tell us where the chalice is and elaborates that this is a sort of test that we've been sent on. Sure enough, Feldu is an addictive substance, which we'll need to ingest in order to access the dungeon to retrieve the chalice. While in theory this quest is about the withdrawal the player will go through without drugs, there's ample enough Feldu in the cave that I never actually experienced the withdrawal symptoms. This turns the burrow into a long dungeon crawl, concluding with us finding the chalice and 3 addicts who had been using it. We use the chalice to cure ourselves of drug addiction because it's that easy, and exit only to be ambushed by more Knights of Order who've erected some kind of obelisk that is summoning more knights. It's a microcosm of the Oblivion Gates, or maybe more accurately a proto-dragon encounter from Skyrim. We'll deal with some enemies that are attacking a random part of the woods and get awarded with some kind of item in the process. Thankfully, like the Oblivion Gates, the way to disable the obelisk comes with it, which are the hearts of the Knights of Order. There's a priest enemy maintaining the obelisk, but since magic doesn't hurt us, he's not a problem, even if he doesn't die until the obelisk is disabled. As a reward for fetching the chalice, the Duke admits us into the Court of Mania. So, I guess we've now learned about their culture. I don't know, I feel like the Dragonborn chopping wood for somebody to earn the title of Thane was more of a cultural lesson than this. This was a dungeon with a gimmick. A fun, unique gimmick that a lot of people rightfully enjoy, but it was not a lesson in the culture of Mania. A proper opposite, then. Dementia's equivalent quest is actually an adventure among the people of Dementia. Syl, the Duchess, is paranoid that somebody is out to get her, and since we're new here, we can't be the suspect, so now we're the Grand Inquisitor. Is shade being thrown at the Purification quest? It is possible since Emil didn't contribute to the Shivering Isles. Our torturer is Herdir, who will be proficient at getting the truth out of people. Oh, and one last thing.
If no one is found, you will be held responsible.
I think the only way to properly pay this quest off is, well, to make it so that there's no traitor. We search all of Crucible only to come up empty-handed, and then we either have to tell a paranoid person who threatened us that they're wrong, or choose one of the NPCs we've spent the last hour meeting to get punished instead. Naturally, when presented with another unique interactive storytelling opportunity, Bethesda fumbled, and there is actually a conspiracy to uncover. Herdir, I am the Grand Inquisitor.
Are you? I'd expected an entrance with a bit more flair. Ah well, perhaps you'll grow into the role. One can hope.
Beautiful. Amazing. Thank you, Wes John. Wait, really? Fucking A. Talk about leaning on your talons and trusting them to carry you. Our man Michael Mack in the court will say that Anya Herrick has been acting a tad more suspiciously as of late. And after some encouragement, she'll point out Mazada, who's a tough cookie and will hold out without evidence. Asking around eventually points us to a secret meeting between Mazada and a Dark Seducer. Oh yeah. The Mania guards are Golden Saints, like the ones from Morrowind with 30 extra pounds, and the Dementia guards are Dark Seducers, which are basically just Dunmer with blue eyes instead of red. They're also looking noticeably empowered from their earlier incarnations. Their new designs are, in my opinion, fairly garish. They're now one giant streak of gold. At least the Dark Seducers have that little green slash to break up the color, but still. Anyways, we overhear a meeting between Mazada and a Dark Seducer, and with this knowledge, we confront the Khajiit again. He offers to cooperate if we meet him at his house in a day. Then we can torture Nelrine, the Seducer, a few times to get her to admit that the conspiracy leader is Murine. Meeting Mazada reveals that he's been murdered, however. Thankfully, he left evidence in his house. All roads lead to Murine, who orchestrated the entire plot and would have actually been perfect Dementia material if not for one thing. She got caught. Knowing this, the Duchess executes Murine and awards us the bow Ruin's Edge, which casts one of several random spell effects, and gives us a place in the Court of Dementia. Alright, so looking at both of these quests. Théodon is the Duke of Mania, and, well, seems to be in a perpetual state of it. Sill's role as the Duchess of Dementia is less clear because dementia has been equated with depressive. Manic depression, or what is now bipolar affective disorder, is clearly the main motif of the expansion.
Well, well, you've experienced both shades of madness. Wonderful! You seem fulfilled.
Sheogorath has us go out and mingle with the twin cultures of New Sheoth in order to better contextualize our job of saving the realm. He basically lays out his entire plan. We'll become his champion, and eventually we'll become him. Before that, however, Sheogorath wants us to relight the Great Torch. This has some religious significance to the city, so we're off to Cylarn, like you even know where that is. Cylarn is currently locked in a red versus blue conflict between the Saints and the Seducers. Which side we pick is superfluous, and that's the point of the Shivering Isles. There's no recognizable difference between the Saints and the Seducers besides their color scheme. This is kind of awkward though, because Skyrim had the identical Imperials versus Stormcloaks conflict. Remember when the series had opposing factions that the player had to choose between that meant meaningful sacrifices? Now, as a thematic point, we have a faction conflict between sides that is intentionally pointless. At least in this case though, the player's final mission is resolving that difference. All that said, the premise of this quest relies on our neutrality in this situation. You could not do a quest like this with the Stormcloaks and Imperials. The premise is that each side is in control of an altar, and one side will need both altars to perform the ritual needed to create the cold flame of Agnon. There is no peaceful resolution, not for Daedra fighting eternal battles, so we need to pick a side and eliminate the other. At first it just seems like picking a team and fighting the other, but there's actually a surprising degree of deception available to the player. The Saints, who have to go on the offensive, have a scout who informs us of a hidden passage that could be used. However, his commander refuses to listen to him because he's a male. He's a male because he's in a lower position in Oriel society. He's not in a lower position because of his gender. Daedra don't have genders, remember? If we guide the Saints through the tunnel, they can easily win the fight. However, we could also take this information to the Seducers and then lead the Saints into an ambush they don't stand a chance against. Or perhaps you tell the Seducers that an attack is coming from the tunnel and then lead the Saints through the front entrance. Whatever happens, the surviving commander then sacrifices themselves to light the fire for us. Don't worry, all Daedra canonically respawn. That's actually why they're so cavalier about this situation. All of the sentient Daedric races operate in logical manners for immortal beings. Honor and status would be super important in a society where nobody dies and nobody new is ever born. We return, having been lit on fire, and the priests approach us to make their case. We're basically choosing which jacket we want, and spoilers, Arden Souls is way better. Sheogorath, impressed, wants us to take over one of the duchies and leaves the choice up to us. I just did a favor for Mania, so Dementia seems the way to go. There are some other benefits. Dementia gets a better ring, they get to summon Dark Seducers, and even better, you'll unlock an even better spell to summon Golden Saints for twice as long by picking Dementia now. But this is exclusivity. There are things you don't get after making a decision. Even an entire quest that will play out differently. We'll start with the Ritual of Mania since it's not canon. Thédon, as a happy-go-lucky kind of guy, is pretty easy to replace. Thédon has to overdose on Greenmote and then we take his heart to the altar. I'm not sure how this ritual is supposed to work if Thédon dies by other means, considering vaporization does happen more frequently in this setting, but sure. Tailing Thédon's servant reveals a hidden supply of Greenmote, but we need to employ stealth to reach it. We poison his food and wine. Thédon's heart will then explode in the middle of dinner and we ascend to the Duke of Mania. That's a fun little quest, but now for the canon ritual, the one where we go after someone who already believes an assassin's on the way. She is accurately paranoid of Sheogorath wanting to replace her, which is that blasphemy or the ultimate worship? Our man Kithlin gets us the key and we kill Sill. Easy as. Except it's a body double, which, what are the odds of two people looking alike in the Shivering Isles? We have to chase her down using a secret escape tunnel, like the tutorial, except now we're the overpowered assassin chasing the leader. She's a fighter and she wields the legendary Nerve Shatter. What's that? No one uses this hammer? Yeah, probably because the weakness to shock effect doesn't do anything without the unofficial patch. We take her heart back to the chapel and...
Sill? Sill is dead? This can't be right. Is this right? What have you done? Have you done this?
Hold your tongue, little Duke, or I'll tear it from your mouth.
Yeah, that plot point came back. Thédon decides to turn coat to the Knights of Order, which is a good reason to take care of Sill. She seemed the more capable of the two. Sheo lets him go, however, because he's happy with how things are turning out. Not out of madness, but because it confirms that things are playing out differently than before. The forces of order have also taken the Fringe, which at first may indicate to players that they're invading from the portal, but really it's more of a tactical move. Without fresh blood entering the realm, the numbers of madness are going to dwindle. As the only remaining leader besides Sheogorath himself, we're sent to command our forces in the Fringe and retake it. Our forces are 4 Dark Seducers whom we can position at will. There's not as much nuance to this as the designer was probably hoping, seeing as unit positioning is mostly irrelevant in Oblivion. It's less like a battle and more like 2 sponges grinding against each other. The commander assumes the source of the knights is the Spire, which is probably being powered underground in some old ruins. The Seducers will stay in Passwall to defend the town and will go disable the Spire, and there's no choice in that matter. Zedifin is an interesting dungeon despite being the same bleak, grey, boring Oblivion fare. There are refugees hiding out in the ruin, knights rushing from the Spire out to battle, and we even run into one of the guys from the beginning. Context and a little bit of scripting turned an average dungeon interesting, which is sort of a prelude to how Skyrim would shift its dungeon design. With the obelisk down and the Fringe handled, we return to Sheogorath. His riding has noticeably changed, and he's a lot more efficient with his conveyance. Yeah, laugh it up. But the conversation prior, he was still his random self. Now he's a lot more focused, which matches what he's saying. He's running short on time, and we still have several things we need to do. For one, we need to go back to Relmina and assist her in building a new gatekeeper. Even though the knights can and do pop up wherever, so replacing the gatekeeper in the Fringe hardly seems relevant, it seems like originally the threat may have actually been external. Like, imagine a story where after the player goes in, the Legion decides to shut this gate down, and instead of fighting Knights of Order, we're fighting Legionaries. Would make the gatekeepers in Xedilian as anti-order weapons more accurate, right? Relmina now works at the bottom of a dungeon, and worse, when she begrudgingly agrees to the building of a new gatekeeper, the building process is yet another dungeon. Unlike before, where there's a direct conflict and stakes, now we're dungeon crawling for more esoteric reasons. Sure, the gatekeeper needs to be built, so it's urgent, but the threats aren't these flesh Atronachs, which, well, stellar work, Bethesda, these guys are awesome. I'm going to save us both a lot of time and skip all of this to the part where we build the gatekeeper. We get to choose all the body parts, which directly affects the stats and powers of the gatekeeper. While neat, I really don't get the point of this, so they had to shoehorn in that you could activate the gatekeeper to get one of his powers. Great, add that to the pile of greater powers I forget to use. We return to Sheogorath to report our success, only for the next quest to actually start. This is urgency done right. The threat is coming early on, but it's not immediate that the player feels compelled to drop everything to handle the situation. Sure, ignoring the orders of a god would be a bad idea, but we have plenty of room to go off and do our own thing. Only once the player gets a ways down the line does the imminent threat of the apocalypse get made apparent to the player. Our army is under attack at their spawn point, which is bad news for us. The question is, where's Jiggalag?
Well, aren't you precious? Do you really not know? Haven't you noodled it all through yet? Because he is me! Well, I'm him! We're a bit of each other, really. I won't be here when he arrives because I'll be him!
A split personality within a split personality. Truly, you are the god. Anyways, we're off to help the Saints, although we'd be helping the Seducers if we were the Duke of Mania. They may not be comfortable with the Duke of Dementia helping them out, but that's what leadership's about, making people feel uncomfortable. That's why I feel the canon approach to this questline is to alternate which aspect of the realm you assist instead of just focusing on one side. We free the commander, but now we take care of all the knights before the wellspring gets stopped up and all the saints turn to stone. Stada, the commander of the saints, is in fact the same golden saint that gets killed during Azura's Morrowind quest, where the player has to stop Sheogorath from interfering with a bet she had made. The premise is that Théoden, switching sides, used his position to get into the base, as though the saints weren't told he was no longer the Duke. Perhaps it's the timing, but we're implied to have been liberating the Fringe for a while, seeing as Sheogorath's demeanor changed over the course of a quest, and we rebuilt the Gatekeeper. So this is really your fault for not doing something sooner. Speaking of, it's too late for Sheogorath. His transformation is beginning and his staff has lost its power. He's black-pilled, naturally, which is why Haskell comes in for the assist. Haskell sends us to an ancient, secret library of Jiggalag. In it we find Dias, a servant of Jiggalag and librarian trapped and forbidden to die. He actually helps us, for reasons we'll get into in a bit. But first, a fetch quest. We go into a dungeon, find the Grove of Reflection, and are faced with our clone, who is normally a challenging fight if not for how hard he gets bodied by my super poison. You may have thought I needed to learn my own weaknesses, but I already knew them pretty well, which was bows and poison damage. The other item is inside an apostle base, a heretic faction formed by a survivor of the last Grey March consisting of people disillusioned about Sheogorath. While we could annihilate the heretics, we could also steal a uniform and infiltrate their ranks, supplying a rebel subfaction with weapons to kill their leader, or simply going straight after our target. Faction uniforms.
Look out your eyes!
And with that, Dias creates the shell of the staff. We'll still need to empower it, which we do at the fountain behind the throne, leading to a lengthy dungeon sequence that involves opening and closing doors with items and creatures. It's interesting. We have to cleanse these pools, and that means killing some priests of order, including Thadon. So that was your moment, huh? You went down like a bitch. With the staff fully powered, we turn to the sacrifice and find the palace is under attack by Order and Jigalag is coming to kill us. We take down 2 obelisks in the courtyard, and then Big J shows up to fight. Alright, so what have you got? Bodied. Hard. I even checked the difficulty and redid the fight. I feel like I messed something up. Like he ended up getting stuck with low difficulty health because I saved in the middle of the fight or something. But looking at his stats, his slow gait, and considering the sheer entity we've crafted up to this point, I guess it's no wonder this fight is so ludicrously easy.
Enough! I am beaten. The Grey March is ended. For millennia, this drama has unfolded, and each time, I have conquered this land, only to be transformed back into that gibbering fool, Sheogorath. It was not always so. Once I ruled this realm, a world of perfect order. My dominion expanded across the seas of Oblivion with each passing era. The other princes, fearful of my power, cursed me with madness, doomed me to live as Sheogorath, a broken soul reigning in a broken land. Once each era, I was allowed my true form, conquering this world anew. And each time I did, the curse was renewed, damning me to exist as Sheogorath. Now, though, you have ended the cycle. You now hold the mantle of madness, and Jigalag is free to roam the voids of Oblivion once more. I will take my leave, and you will remain here, mortal. Mortal, king, god, it seems uncertain. This realm is yours. Perhaps you will grow to your station. Fare thee well, Sheogorath, Prince of Madness.
So we, the player, have taken the role of the Mad God, and what is it?
The issue with the quest that eats at me more than anything is the player's ascension into god status at the end of the quest line. I know I've gone over this when I talked about the Guildmaster ranks, but becoming a god is on another level of stupidity entirely, and I just can't help but mention it. In Sheogorath's Daedric quest, he rains dogs from the sky, and unless Bethesda planned on giving the player the same ability, they should have never let the player become a god in the first place.
This is an extremely narrow-minded perspective to have when it comes to creativity, and I imagine pretty much every single Oblivion fan is going to disagree with that perspective. I try to avoid telling artists what they can and can't do and focus rather on how well they execute their concepts, because then I actually agree with Will. The powers and responsibilities we gain as Sheogorath are not adequate. We can change the weather, guards will no longer take us to the dungeon, people will refer to us as their lord, and we're immortal and can resurrect at the palace. It just feels like the reward for becoming Sheogorath should have been the designers just going wild with spell ideas and powers. But, like the artists who made this game, I'm also ready to finally bury this thing and get it over with. Alright, so let's tackle my list. First, why does Dias help us? If he's a servant of Jyggalag trapped by Sheogorath, then it seems like he wouldn't have made the pivotal plays involved. Jyggalag and Dias both believe in determinism, that it's possible to accurately predict the outcome of events with logic, and have used that to repeatedly curb stomp the Shivering Isles. They were so good, in fact, that the other Daedric princes cursed Jyggalag into becoming Sheogorath, and they didn't even try that with Molag Bal. Jyggalag is emancipated at the end of the questline, however. He started life as a mysterious missing prince in Daggerfall. Ted Peterson, his creator, as well as Douglas Goodall, both corroborate that Jyggalag's narrative purpose was to become the 17th prince should the story ever need one. Normally, he wins the Grey March and then is reverted back into Sheogorath at the end. This time, however, we mantled Sheogorath and were able to defeat Jyggalag. Since he can't revert back into us, he's effectively free, which is actually a desirable outcome for Dias. Yep, we got played. Again. Giving credit where it's due, that Reddit post I linked earlier about the guy with bipolar schizoaffective disorder remarks that the Grey March is similar to medication, explaining that things become cold when medicated, which becomes its own form of madness that contributes to many people with the condition entering cycles of medication and madness. The end of Shivering Isles is basically Sheogorath shouting to the world that he is done taking his medication. But the big question is, did the cock become Sheogorath? I've said before that unless there's a necessary narrative purpose for characters to cross multiple questlines, that I generally operate under the rules of assuming that each individual questline was done by its own unique character. The Narevering was the guy who defeated Dagoth Ur and potentially went on to defeat Almalexia. He was not the guy who solved the disappearance of the dwarves or found Auriel's bow or took down the Thieves' Guild. Arguably, he was not even the guy who fought Hircine and Bloodmoon. Likewise, I don't subscribe to the theory that the cock defeated Mehrunes Dagon, and then went on to defeat Umril the Unfeathered, and then mantled Sheogorath and defeated Jyggalag. It's fine if you do. You can believe your character did whatever you want them to have done. But people get really defensive about this point. It is so ingrained in people's heads that the cock equals Sheogorath that even mentioning I don't believe this to be the case will spark arguments, usually citing this line from Skyrim.
You are the best septum that's ever ruled. Well, except for that Martin fella. But he turned into a dragon god, and that's hardly sport. You know, I was there for that whole sordid affair. Marvelous time. Butterflies, blood, a fox, a severed head, and the cheese to die for.
Now, rather than taking this as just a sequel playfully referring to its prior game, people take this line as a hard canon that cock equals Sheogorath. First, unreliable narrator, literally the most common trope in Elder Scrolls. Second, Sheogorath did participate in the event even without the Shivering Isles, considering every Daedric prince would have been interested in the outcome of the crisis. He also says, I'm a mad god. The mad god, actually. It's a family title. Gets passed down to me to myself every few thousand years. ESO took this as a cue to say Haskell also mantled Sheogorath at one point, which, no.
You'll be stopping the Grey March, altering the course of events, breaking the cycle. We're going to change things. No, things will be different this time around. You'll be my champion. You'll grow powerful. You'll grow to be me. Prince of Madness, a new Sheogorath. Or you'll die trying. I love that about you. Wondering why I let him go, aren't ya? I can see it in your face. Mostly in the eyes. I may take those from you when this is done. This has never happened before. The ruler of Mania, turning traitor. Unprecedented. But different is good. A new act in this play. Maybe we're onto something here. We'll see how it plays out. It can't be worse than what's happened before.
Following each cycle of the Grey March, Sheogorath has cast out or killed every aspect of order found in the Shivering Isles. I alone have survived. Sheogorath cannot bring himself to destroy the knowledge that I possess. Instead, he's confined me to this place and forbidden me to die. I have not seen another creature until fate, predictably, sent you to me.
The Grey March is ended. For millennia, this drama has unfolded, and each time, I have conquered this land, only to be transformed back into that gibbering fool, Sheogorath. Now, though, you have ended the cycle. You now hold the mantle of madness, and Jigalag is free to roam the voids of Oblivion once more. This realm is yours. Perhaps you will grow to your station. Fare thee well, Sheogorath, Prince of Madness.
I'm not just saying it didn't happen, because you can make that case if you want. I'm saying that if you retcon it to have happened, you're simultaneously making the story of the Shivering Isles worse in the process. The point of the Shivering Isles is that Sheogorath is using us to try something new, that Jigalag can't have accounted for. The expansion is essentially an 8-hour-long diss track about how determinism is wrong. Or is it? After all, Jigalag did account for us and did plan for us to break him free, then perhaps the point is that everything that happens in the Elder Scrolls universe is deterministic. Pretty cool, right? It's a literary mirror to the main quest, how both the good and bad guys have an interest in making a certain outcome occur in order to change things. Except this time we're Martin instead of Haskell, and the roles of which side wants change and which side wants order have been reversed. However, if you are absolutely convinced that the cock is Sheo and you can't be swayed, I'll give you some ammo to fight back. This is the Wes Johnson theory. Wes Johnson, as the voice of the Imperials, naturally voices a lot of characters in Oblivion. Then you start to realize, the guards are Wes Johnson, so are the beggars. We start Knights of the Nine and Wes Johnson's prophet guides us into becoming Wes Johnson's Pelennor Whitestrake. We arrive at the gate to the Shivering Isles to be greeted by Wes Johnson as a guard and are invited in by Wes Johnson as Sheogorath. All of these characters are actually Sheogorath, gradually guiding the cock towards this fate. Lucien Lachance, Wes Johnson. Raminus Polus, Wes Johnson. Varanus Daunton, Wes Johnson. Herdir, Wes Johnson. Cathatet, the Dremora in Paradise, Wes Johnson. Hieronymus Lex and the Grey Fox, Wes Johnson and Wes Johnson. The arena announcer from the very beginning of this playthrough, Wes Johnson.
I have been every voice you have ever heard inside your head.
Hello there.
Funny thing is, I stopped playing this character shortly after completion and only started it up again to fact check some stuff, and within a couple minutes I got this notification. I didn't realize, but we went from 0 to Mad God in less than a week. And even less time than that considering Dunburrow Cove was before the entire Dark Brotherhood questline. We've got one more quest that it only felt appropriate to handle now thanks to our new position, Paranoia. The second time I visited Skingrad, I was chased down in the dead of night to outside the city where I was to meet the Count's manservant turned necromancer. Despite meeting us out in the vineyard in the dead of night, he's insistent we find a more secluded spot, behind the chapel. Glarthier here is paranoid that there is a conspiracy of people out to get him, and he's absolutely right. As a responsible patron deity, we take to helping him out. The quest involves 4 phases. In the first 3, we're given a name and tasked with following them. The goal is to find evidence that these people are spying on him, although all we really find is that during certain parts of the day they cross paths, giving Glarthier ample suspicion. Most of them will put on an act that they don't know who he is or only know him as the town eccentric. The conspiracy runs deep, however, running from a commoner woman up to the castle and even the proprietors of the local vineyard. We aren't doing this for the money Glarthier offers us, but to help support his cause. Our testimony alone is evidence enough, and eventually he'll task us with eliminating his enemies. Nobody. This is something you have to do. This is your metamorphosis. Go get him, Tiger.
They think I don't know. They think I don't see.
Die!
You didn't even manage to kill any of them. Still, there are plenty of other ways to proceed. You can tell Glarthier that nobody is stalking him, at which point he assumes that you're in on the conspiracy and attacks you. You can also take his note to the guards as proof of conspiracy to commit murder and they'll kill him. I assume you guys attempted to arrest him first, right? You can, of course, murder his targets, which will change based on who you implicate. The best way to handle this is probably to only implicate Tudius Sextius. While there isn't any downside to killing Bernadette or David, Tudius is the only one of 3 that really deserves it.
Perhaps you should seek out a priest, perhaps a beggar or guardsman. You and I, we have nothing in common. What could we possibly talk about?
Dude, you're a noble, and I'm a god. Ultimately, returning to Oblivion after the Shivering Isles is like watching a TikTok after this video. I had to get B-roll and did a few side quests, but the novelty of the game has long since worn out, and seeing almost everything done better does not help. Having gone from being the protagonist of Oblivion to becoming the protagonist of the Shivering Isles, it's only fitting to end on Sheogorath. Sheogorath has fundamentally changed. He's a pleb tier character now.
Jeez!
I do not find the personality shifts mid-conversation entertaining. He was made this way to amuse, not to truly portray madness. His Morrowind quest tasked us with taking a fork and killing a flying jellyfish with it. And he asked for that with a straight face. Shivering Isles Sheogorath feels like he's in on the joke. It's iconic, but it's also a shame. That said, Sheogorath also truly does feel like the patron of madness. He seems to know everybody native to his realm by name, and going back to Cyrodiil to do mundane quests seems like something that he would do. In a way, Shivering Isles was exactly the perfect setting for an Oblivion expansion. It wouldn't have worked for Morrowind, and it wouldn't have worked for Skyrim. You needed the batshit lunacy of Oblivion to sell this idea.